Shaka Zulu's greatest enemy, the rise and fall of Zwide kaLanga. We all know the name Shaka Zulu, the legendary king who built an empire from scattered clans, the military genius who rewrote the rules of warfare in southern Africa. His name echoes through history, a titan spoken of with a mix of awe and fear. But his story isn't just about his rise. It's also about the man who almost ended it all. A rival so powerful, so ambitious that their conflict didn't just define an era. It sparked the creation of new nations across a continent. This isn't just Shaka's story. This is the story of the man who stood against him, the king who nearly broke him, and the epic struggle that redrew the map of Africa forever. This is the story of Shaka Zulu's greatest enemy, Zwide kaLanga. To really understand what made the clash between Shaka and Zwide so epic, you have to picture southern Africa at the turn of the 1800s. Imagine a green rolling landscape between the Drakensberg Mountains and the Indian Ocean. This place later, known as Zululand, wasn't one kingdom. It was a patchwork of dozens of Nguni-speaking clans and chiefdoms. For generations, life revolved around tradition, cattle, and small-scale conflicts. But things were about to change fast. A devastating drought and famine, the Madlathul famine, had taken hold, pushing communities into a desperate fight for survival. At the same time, Portuguese traders at Delagoa Bay were creating new opportunities for wealth and power, especially for anyone who could control the trade routes. This mix of environmental disaster and economic ambition was a powder keg. Old traditions were failing, and out of the chaos, bigger, more aggressive, and more militarized states started to rise. Three titans emerged from this storm, each wanting to unite the clans under his rule. There was Sobhuza of the Ndwandwe, a powerful leader who would eventually be forced north to found the nation of Swaziland. There was Dingiswayo of the Mfecane, a smart and visionary ruler who preferred to build his confederation through alliances. And then there was Zwide, king of the Ndwandwe. Zwide kaLanga took the throne around 1805. The Ndwandwe were already a force to be reckoned with. But Zwide's ambition was boundless. He was a ruthless and brilliant leader who didn't believe in alliances. He believed in conquest. His strategy was brutally simple. Any chief who stood in his way had their clan attacked and swallowed by his growing Ndwandwe empire. His power was magnified by his mother, Queen Ntombazi. In oral histories, she's often painted as a powerful sorceress. But that legend hides the truth of who she was, one of the sharpest political minds of her time. She was Zwide's chief advisor and a master strategist who was essential to the kingdom's expansion. She saw the value in controlling the trade routes to the coast, and her advice steered Zwide's every move. The legends say she kept a collection of the skulls of conquered kings, a terrifying symbol of Ndwandwe supremacy and a chilling warning to anyone who dared to defy them. Together, Zwide and Ntombazi built the Ndwandwe into the region's most feared military power. Their capital in the region we now call Nongoma was the heart of a rapidly expanding empire. Zwide's regiments, like the famed Amanala, were known for their ferocity. He was the apex predator in this new violent world, and his shadow was spreading across the land. Standing in his way was his main rival, Dingiswayo of the Mfecane. The stage was set for a showdown between two kings with two very different ideas of power, a conflict that was about to pull in a young warrior who would change everything. While Zwide was conquering his neighbors, a different kind of power was growing within the Mfecane Confederation. King Ndwandwe had taken a young outcast prince under his wing. The prince was from a tiny, unimportant clan called the Zulu. His name was Shaka Zulu. Shaka's early life was full of shame. As the illegitimate son of the Zulu chief, he and his mother Nandi were exiled and constantly mocked. They found a home with the Mfecane, and it was there that Shaka's military genius began to emerge. He joined Ndwandwe's army and quickly made a name for himself, not just for his courage but for his revolutionary ideas. Back then, warfare was often a ritualized affair of shouting insults and throwing long, flimsy spears from a safe distance. Shaka wanted something more decisive, more final. He developed a new weapon, the ikawa, a short stabbing spear with a broad blade made for brutal close-quarters combat. He trained his soldiers to fight in tight, disciplined formations and to be relentlessly aggressive. Ndwandwe saw the fire in his protege, and when Shaka's father died, he backed Shaka's claim to lead the small Zulu clan. With Ndwandwe's blessing, Shaka began turning his handful of Zulu warriors into the deadliest fighting force the region had ever seen. The two kings were close friends and allies, and their warriors fought together against their common foe, Zwide and the Ndwandwe. The rivalry between Ndwandwe and Zwide was a high-stakes chess match for land, people, and trade. Zwide used strategic marriages to spread his influence, even marrying one of his daughters to the Swazi king, Sobhuza. But these were just political tools. When Sobhuza claimed land that Zwide wanted, Zwide didn't hesitate to attack his own son-in-law and drive him north. The inevitable war between the Ndwandwe and the Mfecane finally erupted around 1817. The exact details are lost in the mists of oral tradition, but the result was a disaster for the Mfecane. Most accounts say that Ndwandwe was ambushed, captured and taken to Zwide's capital. There, the great king was executed. Zwide must have thought this single act would shatter his rival's confederation for good. Some traditions even claim Ndwandwe's skull was added to Queen Ntombazi's gruesome collection. With Ndwandwe gone, the Mfecane alliance fell apart. The power vacuum was huge. Zwide, the predator, had taken out his greatest rival. For a moment, he was the undisputed king of the region, but in killing the mentor, he had unleashed the protege. Shaka, heartbroken by the loss of his friend and king, didn't run. He seized the moment. He rallied the terrified, leaderless Mfecane warriors and absorbed them into his own Zulu clan. He gave them a new leader, a new purpose, and a burning desire for one thing: revenge. Now, only two men mattered. On one side, Zwide, the powerful emperor with a massive, conquering army. On the other, Shaka, the upstart chief of a newly forged nation, ready to fight for his survival. The war for the future was about to begin. The first great test came in April of 1818. Furious that this minor Zulu chief was still defying him, Zwide sent a massive army to finish the job. This wasn't a raid. It was an invasion meant to annihilate. The Ndwandwe army, with some estimates putting it at over 10,000 strong, was led by Zwide's eldest son and heir. Nomalanjana Shaka was wildly outnumbered with maybe 5,000 warriors to his name. A straight-up fight on an open field would have been suicide. Shaka knew his only chance was to use the terrain, his men's discipline, and his own cunning. He chose his battlefield carefully, a crescent-shaped hill called Gukokli. His plan was a masterclass in defense. First, he torched the earth in the path of the advancing Ndwandwe, leaving them no food or water. He had most of the Zulu cattle, the kingdom's wealth hidden away in the dense Nkandla forest. But he cleverly left a small decoy herd near his royal homestead, tempting bait to split Zwide's army. As Nomahlanjana's massive force arrived, Shaka had his men deployed on Gokokli Hill. The hill was a natural fortress. Its steep, rocky slopes canceled out the Ndwandwe's advantage in numbers. Shaka packed his men into a tight defensive ring around the summit, confident they would win. The Ndwandwe charged up the slopes again and again. Each time they slammed into a wall of cowhide shields and were met by the deadly short stabbing spears of the Zulu. The terrain forced the attackers to bunch up, making them easy targets. The battle raged for hours, a brutal, bloody struggle under the African sun. As the Ndwandwe started to wear down, Shaka played his next card. He had hidden reserves in a dip on the hilltop out of sight. While the main Ndwandwe force was pinned down, he sent a small group of his men to fake a retreat, luring part of Nomahlanjana's army away in pursuit. Then came the master stroke, and perhaps the first major use of what would become the legendary Zulu tactic, the Impondo Zankomo, the horns of the buffalo. Shaka sent 2 flanking horns of his warriors racing to encircle the Ndwandwe who had been drawn away. Suddenly, the pursuers were the ones who were trapped, attacked from all sides. The shock was absolute. The result was a slaughter. Thrown into a panic, the trapped Ndwandwe were cut to pieces. Among the dead was Nomahlanjana himself. Some traditions even claimed that 4 of his brothers died alongside him, a devastating blow of 5 sons lost in a single afternoon. When the rest of the Ndwandwe army saw the disaster, their spirit broke and they began to retreat. The Battle of Gokokli Hill was a stunning victory for Shaka. It was costly. The Zulu may have lost up to 2,000 men, but tradition holds that the Ndwandwe losses were catastrophic. Shaka had survived. He had proved that a brilliant strategy could beat overwhelming numbers. But the war wasn't over. For Zwide, this wasn't just a military defeat. It was personal. He was enraged by the loss of his sons and humiliated by the upstart Zulu chief. He would not make the same mistakes twice. He started gathering an even bigger army to wipe Shaka and his kingdom from the face of the earth. Gokokli Hill wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. 2 years passed. 2 years of Zwide's simmering rage and Shaka's frantic preparations. The old king's grief had hardened into pure vengeance. He called up every warrior he had, building an army of staggering size, possibly as large as 18,000 men. This time, there would be no clever tricks on a hill. This time, the Zulu kingdom would be drowned under a wave of Ndwandwe fury. The year was 1820. The final war had come. Shaka knew he couldn't win another defensive fight like Gokokli Hill. The numbers Zwide was bringing were just too great. His kingdom was still young, and he couldn't afford to trade lives even in victory. So he flipped the script. He decided to turn Zwide's greatest strength, the size of his army, into his greatest weakness. As the enormous Ndwandwe force marched into Zululand, they found nothing. The villages were empty. The grain stores were ashes. The cattle were gone. Shaka had ordered another scorched earth policy, but this time on a massive scale. He began a strategic retreat, pulling the Ndwandwe army deeper and deeper into his territory. He refused to give them a battle. Instead, he bled them with guerrilla tactics. Quick stabbing raids on their flanks, followed by a swift disappearance into the bush. The huge Ndwandwe army was like a great starving beast. It needed food and water, and the land provided none. Days stretched into weeks. The warriors grew hungry, exhausted, and demoralized. Chasing the ghost-like Zulu army was infuriating. Zwide's generals, men who would become legends in their own right, like Soshangane and Ndwandwe, could only push forward, desperate to corner Shaka. And Shaka was leading them right where he wanted them, the Mfecane River. He knew this land. He waited, as patient as a crocodile. The moment came when the hungry, frustrated Ndwandwe army had to cross the river. As the massive force began its slow, clumsy crossing, it was split in two and completely vulnerable. That's when Shaka struck. He threw his entire army not at the whole Ndwandwe force, but at the half that had already made it to the other side. The battle was pure chaos. The Ndwandwe, ambushed and exhausted, couldn't form their battle lines. Those who had crossed were swarmed by screaming Zulu regiments. Those still on the far bank could only watch in horror as their comrades were slaughtered, unable to help. The river had become a wall of death. The Zulu warriors were fresh, motivated, and fighting on their own terms. The attack was overwhelming. The Ndwandwe army, which had marched in with such confidence, completely fell apart. It wasn't a battle, it was a rout. Their command structure was shattered, their famous regiments scattered. Zwide, the great king, had to run for his life, escaping with just a handful of his men. Shaka's victory was total, but his revenge wasn't quite finished. With the Ndwandwe army destroyed, Shaka sent his regiments to their homeland. They marched on Zwide's main stronghold and burned it to the ground. Legend has it that in the assault, Queen Ntombazi was killed, and her grim collection of royal skulls was finally destroyed. A symbolic end to an era. The Ndwandwe kingdom, the dominant power for a generation, was gone. Its king was a fugitive and its people were scattered. Shaka now stood as the undisputed master of the region. The Zulu Empire was born, but Zwide's fall would have consequences that no one, not even Shaka, could have imagined. The end of this war was the beginning of a violent new chapter for the entire subcontinent. The crushing defeat at the Mfecane River did more than just create the Zulu Empire. It triggered a cataclysmic chain reaction that would reshape southern Africa. This period of chaos, migration, and war is known as the Mfecane, the crushing. While its causes are complex, historians point to drought, population pressures, and even the distant slave trade. The sudden collapse of the Ndwandwe kingdom threw gasoline on the fire. Zwide himself became a wanderer. What happened to him isn't clear. Some stories say Shaka's warriors hunted him down and killed him. Others say he fled north and died a few years later around 1825. But the king's fate was less important than the fate of his generals. These were tough, ambitious men who had led Zwide's powerful armies. They weren't about to bend the knee to Shaka. With their homeland in ruins, they took their followers and carved out their own kingdoms. They became migrating warlords, taking the brutal new way of war with them and in the process becoming the founders of new nations. One of the most famous was Soshangane. He led a large group of Ndwandwe survivors northeast, far from Shaka's reach, and forged a powerful new state in modern-day Mozambique, the Gaza Empire. Like Zwide and Shaka, Soshangane was a nation-builder, conquering local peoples and absorbing them into his Zulu-style kingdom. At its peak, the Gaza Empire was huge, exerting so much pressure that he even forced some Portuguese coastal settlements to pay him tribute. The Shangaan people of the region are his legacy. Another of Zwide's generals, Ndwandwe, led his people, who became known as the Ngoni, on one of the most incredible journeys in African history. For over 20 years, they migrated more than 1,000 miles north, crossing the Great Zambezi River in 1835, an event that oral histories say happened during a solar eclipse. Ndwandwe used the military tactics he'd learned fighting Shaka to build a powerful mobile kingdom, absorbing conquered peoples as he went. After Ndwandwe's death, his kingdom broke into smaller states, but that only spread his influence further. His successors set up powerful Ngoni kingdoms across East and Central Africa in what is now Tanzania, Malawi, and Zambia. The Mfecane was a brutal, destructive period that caused immense suffering, but it was also a time of incredible political change. It wiped out old kingdoms and created new ones. The war between Shaka and Zwide was like a political Big Bang, sending fragments of the Ndwandwe flying across the continent where they formed new empires and new peoples. Zwide's fall, ironically, meant that the influence of his people and their culture would spread far beyond anything he could have ever imagined. The rivalry between Shaka Zulu and Zwide kaLanga wasn't just a clash of two powerful men. It was the moment that forged the destiny of southern Africa. Shaka's victory made him a legend. He built the Zulu Empire into the region's dominant power, a nation whose name became a synonym for warrior. His military and social reforms would be studied for generations. He is remembered, and rightly so, as a nation-builder of brutal genius. But what about Zwide? History often casts him as the villain Shaka had to defeat, but that's too simple. Zwide was a brilliant and ambitious king who built a powerful and successful nation. For a time, he was the most powerful man in the region, a king of kings who was on the verge of total domination. His defeat wasn't just the fall of a man, but the fall of an empire that was for a moment the equal of the Zulu, and the greatest irony is what happened after he lost. His fall didn't erase his people. It scattered them like seeds in the wind. His generals, Mfecane and Ndwandwe, carried the Ndwandwe spirit across Africa. They founded the Gaza Empire and the Ngoni kingdoms. They created new nations and new identities that endure to this day. The story of Zwide kaLanga shows that history is never just about heroes and villains or winners and losers. Zwide was Shaka's greatest enemy, the man who almost cut his story short. But in his defeat, he accidentally became one of the great unsung founders of modern southern Africa, a king whose legacy was born from the ashes of his own fallen kingdom. If you found this story about the rivalry that shaped a continent as fascinating as we do, please subscribe and hit the notification bell for more deep dives into African history. These are stories that deserve to be told. Let us know in the comments, do you think Zwide's defeat was the single biggest trigger of the Mfecane? We'd love to hear what you think. Thanks for watching.